now.
All right. Welcome. I am Francine Engel, and I'm a judge from Maryland. I am a political scientist, and I focus on American constitutional development. And I currently work with the Maryland Council for Civic and History Education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Broman. I currently work on Capitol Hill for Representative Don Young of Alaska. Been up there for about 5 years. Previous to that, I was in law school, so I have also an attorney. And then prior to that, I was an alumni that participated in the We the People program at Nationals in 2006. So I've been where you're sitting. Don't worry about it. You guys are going to do fine. You're going to do great. Looking forward to it.
All right, everyone. My name is Evan Gastner. I'm a civil rights attorney in Lexington, South Carolina. This is my first year judging We the People at the national level, though I've done the state competition for probably about 12 or 13 years now. I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to your presentation.
All right. Can you introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, I'm Soren Olson.
I'm Claire Adams Crow.
I'm Gabriella Verona.
And I'm Carter Swanson. We are all sophomores at Cottonwood Classical in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and our teacher is Bill Torres.
All right. Thank you. All right. So I will go ahead and read the question. So we have a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes. Quote, "I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states." End quote. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review? You may begin.
Thomas Jefferson states, quote, "To consider judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy," end quote. Whereas Justice John Marshall would say, quote, "It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is," end quote. There have always been differing opinions on what the role of the judicial branch is supposed to be. Even two cousins, Jefferson and Marshall, had highly contradictory views.
However, thanks to officials like Justice Marshall, we can now consider the power of judicial review to be solidly on the side of federalism. The aforementioned justice used principles of federalism in McCulloch v. Maryland, a case that allocated significant judicial power over state legislation. Even if the Supreme Court sometimes rules in favor of state governments, the very fact that they can control state legislation makes them a powerful tool of federalism. Of course, in modern day, the federalism debate is not as relevant as the debate of whether the Supreme Court actually represents the people.
This begs the question, is the Supreme Court too counter-majoritarian, and is that really a bad thing? One of the bases of the democratic Republican structure of our government is to keep power away from the mob.
In his famous Lyceum address, Abraham Lincoln stated, quote, "When men take in their heads today to hang gamblers or burn murderers, they should recollect that in the confusion usually attending such transactions, they will be as likely to hang or burn someone who's neither a gambler nor a murderer as one who is," end quote. Just because the majority of people agree on something does not mean that it is necessarily right.
The majority thought that slavery and segregation were good things, or at least the majority of people who were given a voice did. This is not what made the idea that majority rule supreme so dangerous, because not often everyone is heard. The commonly held notion that school segregation was acceptable was eventually overturned by Brown versus Board of Education, because the majority did not have the final say. This same thing was applied to Obergefell versus Hodges and Loving versus Virginia.
A more modern example of this exact idea is the riot that occurred on January 6th, which led to the storming of the Capitol on the grounds that the election had been, quote, "stolen." The issue that this presents within our modern society is that people live in their own echo chambers of like ideas, similar to the isolation that occurs within a faction. In Federalist 10, James Madison called factions, quote, "groups united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community," end quote.
The way our society functions on social media and other such platforms is that you primarily hear from people who agree with you. It cuts off most reasonable discussion between opposing sides because in the world of a social media faction, no one disagrees. Therefore, many Americans are part of factions without even knowing it.
The Supreme Court plays a vital role in our country because it reminds everyone that just because a majority or even a loud minority agree on something, it does not make it right. The Supreme Court is able to achieve that because it is not part of the majority. Its function is counter-majoritarian.
Although the judicial branch uses its great power to serve a critical purpose within our government, it should still be carefully limited. And so the dilemma becomes, how should we limit the power of the Supreme Court without it resulting in an imbalance?
By restricting the power of judicial review, we would be giving significantly more power to the legislative and executive branches. For example, in 2005, Congress passed H.R. 4437, the Border Protection, Anti-Terrorism, and Illegal Immigration Control Act, which took power away from the judiciary branch by making it more difficult for individuals under threat of deportation to get a court date. However, it also gave the legislative branch more power by making their strict immigration policies more effective. Therefore, the best way to limit judicial review would be to change the way it's implemented, not the amount of influence it holds.
The organization of the Supreme Court was intended to keep justices as apolitical as possible so that they would decide each case as it came in a way that they felt was right based on the specific circumstances. This was supposedly achieved by giving Supreme Court justices lifelong terms in office so they would not have to run for re-election and be unduly influenced by political agendas.
However, because justices are appointed by very political presidents who have their own agendas, now instead of ruling on a case-by-case basis, justices are being conditioned to follow party lines.
One measure to make the judicial branch function more in accordance with the views of the people, and therefore make judicial review less problematic, would be to institute term limits. By doing this, America would make its judicial branch much less static and therefore more representative of the views of the people. As of right now, President Biden has appointed a committee to research potential conditions surrounding the addition of judicial term limits.
Thank you. Sure, I'm not on mute. All right. A lot of interesting stuff in your statement. All right. You brought up term limits as a possibility. If we instituted term limits, what would that look like? Like how long would it be?
Go ahead, Storm.
So the idea of instituting a term limit would obviously be to control how justices really relate to the people and consider whether they are relevant to what is happening in modern times. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to. There is not really a realistic way to stop them from being elected or being appointed in a political way, as the main two options are them being elected by citizens or being appointed by political presidents. But if we instituted a term limit of, say, perhaps 8 to 20 years, you wouldn't have justices who have been on the court for many decades and have skewed perceptions of what is going on right now in America, making choices for people who perhaps weren't even born when they were appointed.
And so the initial idea of giving judges a lifelong term limit is so that they would not be influenced by politics of the day, right? Which is one of the great fears of our founding fathers. However, this is no longer the case because the president, who's a very, very political office, appoints these justices. And just like we saw with President Trump, he appointed a new justice. So now that our Supreme Court has a much bigger split, and for the most part, we know how our judges are going to vote, either conservative or liberal. And so this is the problem with these lifelong limits. These judges are no longer accountable to anyone but themselves and perhaps the party that they were elected by. Whereas if they were given a term limit, like my colleague said, maybe like 20 years or something like that, along those lines, it would make them accountable to the people at the very least.
Do you think they're accountable to the parties that nominate them once they've been confirmed and are on the bench? Do you think they feel that they have to be?
I would still say yes, just because even now, people with the emergence of something called cancel culture, which we see very evidently on social media, a lot of the time you find that people fall in and out of public favor very quickly. And as a justice, if it were myself in that position, I would not want to fall out of public favor and perhaps be even like removed from my position solely because I had fallen out of public favor for something that I could have controlled.
Justices are also appointed based on what their views are at the time of their appointment. Like Justice Barrett was appointed by a Republican president because of her views. So I think that it's not just going to change as soon as the person who appointed them leaves office, because that's the reason they were appointed and that's the reason they were chosen. So if that person truly does have those values and those ideologies, they're going to stick to them regardless of who's in office.
On top of that, though, I would like to disagree a little bit with my colleagues in saying that I think to an extent the judges are often only accountable to themselves because originally they have to stick to a party line in order to get elected at all. But once they are confirmed, then nobody can touch judges really, and so they are a lot less accountable than many other branches of the government. So I think giving a term limit might help them to become more accountable.
So let's talk about the counter-majoritarian part of this question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did you think that and I apologize if I missed it, did you think the counter-majoritarian position of the Supreme Court was a good idea?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then why do you want them to be more accountable to the people?
So considering that, so they are a counter-majoritarian. They do have a counter-majoritarian function. However, right now they are. We were looking to sort of balance their position rather than sway it to one side or the other, because right now they're in a position where they're serving the party that elected them more than the entire American people, and I would consider that just a different kind of majoritarianism.
Are the Supreme Court justices supposed to serve the people or the Constitution? And is there a difference?
I don't think there's much of a difference at all. The Constitution was written to protect all the people of America. And like we talked about in our statement, the Supreme Court and judicial review helped to protect, helped to end school segregation, which was one instance of where like white people were the only people who had a voice. And so the Supreme Court, being against that maybe loud, that majority or perhaps loud minority, allowed that to be overruled and overturned. And so I think, yes, in that instance, they were protecting the Constitution because the Constitution is set up to protect all of the people.
Do you think the court could have written the Brown decision if they had been elected by the people?
I would argue that they could not have, because a lot of the time in that particular day and age, there was a lot of clashing of heads on that particular subject. And so if the Supreme Court had been elected by the people in that time, it would have been much more difficult to serve what we think nowadays as the right decision, serve the right verdict, to actually give what we now in modern days consider to be right. I mean, I think it's an interesting question, because it would be so different, I think, if they had been elected by the people.
To an extent, but I also think that it's not fair to say that it completely couldn't have happened, because if all of the judges in the Supreme Court were elected by the people, there are several different scenarios and different instances that could take into play as to what the people of where they're electing them, because there were different views based on different geographical location in America. And so I think that it's not necessarily fair to say that it would have never gotten done, but I think I agree partially with that statement.
All right, thank you.
Evan, do you have something?
Well, I think we're about out of time now, aren't we, John?
Minute. We have a minute.
We've got 20 seconds left.
Okay. Yeah, I don't even think I get a question out in that time. I tend to be a bit wordy. Could you just wait for the buzzer to go on?
Well, fantastic job. We can give the students a round of
You
applause.
cannot get a question out, Evan. This 8-minute time stuff is throwing us off a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. But you all did a great job answering our questions, so thank you.
And it's not a big deal. I don't think that I didn't get to ask a question. You know, when one of the judges asks a question and there's follow up and debate from that, I think that's exactly what we're looking for.
Yep.
Yeah, so I thought you did a fabulous job, and I like the way that you set it up right from the beginning, where you show the contrasting views between Thomas Jefferson and John Marshall, because people, sometimes forget that during the founding, that this was definitely a highly contentious issue, and there were a lot of people like Thomas Jefferson, who thought that giving the Supreme Court judicial review would be like the worst thing that you could possibly do. All right. And so John Marshall does assert this power for himself in Marbury versus Madison. But when he did that, it wasn't as if everybody immediately agreed with what he came up with. There were many people that were upset with that. So I like how you kind of, started your presentation with that and bringing the historical context to the whole debate. You had a lot of great examples, a lot of court cases. You brought up the Federalist Papers. The thing that I thought was really interesting, how you brought up factions and you related it to social media, and talking about how, we're all in sort of our own echo chambers. And it's, it's a real serious problem in terms of what's going on with social media. I have on one social media, they seem to think I'm liberal, and on the other social media, they seem to think I'm conservative. And I get two things, different feeds on the same issue, and it's hilarious. And I don't want to sort of change anything because I want to be able to get both of these things, this exact same video, and all of a sudden it's just amazing to see this. So I was really interested. I thought that was a really interesting point that you brought that up, because nobody has really brought that up yet. And I thought you did a great job answering all the questions. And I'm blown away because I think you said you're all in 10th grade. You're probably the youngest people in this competition. We don't really get a lot of 9th and 10th graders, and this is hard stuff for somebody in 10th grade. So I am just super, super impressed that you are able to do this and that you're here competing with seniors who are, ready to graduate and go to college. So you should be really, really proud of yourselves, because you did a great job. And you were defending all your positions extremely well. So congratulations.
Yeah, you guys did a great job of coming back and giving like your reasoning behind what you were talking about. So when I ask a question about does the Supreme Court represent the Constitution or the people? And so what I was hoping to hear a little bit more of is how the Constitution and the people are actually different. So the will of the people and the guidelines and the guardrails of the Constitution are going to be pretty different mostly. And so just keep in mind that there's a difference between how law works and then how politics works. And this is one of the fun things about our system, is that while the confirmation process can be very partisan, and it has been for the past 5-ish confirmations, well, actually probably longer. But anyways, I've been around for the past 3 of them. Let me tell you, that was fun working in the Senate while those were going on. But while it seems partisan at that point, sometimes these judges turn around and surprise people. So for example, Chief Justice Roberts was appointed by Bush, and then he was kind of the swing vote to uphold the Obamacare legislation in the Obamacare decision against Civilis, one of the two. Anyways, but there's not always a really, sometimes they stay close to what we think they're going to vote on, but sometimes they surprise us. Particularly, for example, the other example I have automatically is Justice Gorsuch voted with some of the more quote unquote liberal sides of the justices on a Indian law decision with McGirt versus Oklahoma. And which is a huge deal. I deal with mostly Native policy for the congressman, so that's why I was paying attention to that one. But you never quite know how they're gonna go. And so it's not necessarily so much politics, it might be more constitutional interpretation. So if we had had more time, or if I had thought quicker, honestly, to talk more about what does constitutional interpretation actually do in regards to the confirmation process, and not just politics, because sometimes the stances are assumed, but if you watch the confirmations, a lot of justices, whether they're being appointed by a Republican or a Democrat, they're not going to answer the hypotheticals, because part of our system of law is that you're only taking the case that's before you on those facts. It's sometimes a very fact-based decision. So it can be an interesting difference between what we would expect politics to do and what lawyers and judges eventually do. So as you guys are like learning more about this stuff, like you just keep in mind that it seems like they go together, but sometimes they can be very separate. So you guys have a great understanding, and it was a really fun conversation. I'm glad we got a chance to do it. And I would just encourage you to keep learning as well as you're going. So thank you.
Yeah, and everyone, great job. I often say every year in the state competitions that this is not easy material. The fact you're in 10th grade, I think, is all that more impressive. These are things I didn't start to learn about till I was in college. And then after that in law school, really delve in, head first and really, really get into this stuff. If someone had put this in front of me in high school, I don't think I could have done nearly as well as any of you, especially in 10th grade. Not easy stuff, and it's not an exact science always, or it's not like math where there's a right answer and wrong answer. It's all just ideas and a whole lot of trial and error. So yeah, just not simple concepts to wrap your head around. But by your presentation, I can tell you all have done a ton of reading, a lot of debating and talking in class, and a whole lot of preparation. So good job.
Yeah, great job, guys.
Great job.